Hey everybody, this is Christian, and today I'm going to show you how to simplify all of your CI CD pipelines in GitLab by using components. This feature was introduced in GitLab version 17 and it allows you to create reusable pipelines that can be used across your entire GitLab platform. So if you have similar types of automation jobs that you always want to use across different projects, for example, deploy a Docker Compose file on a remote server or manage your infrastructure as code with Terraform, you can define these type of jobs in a GitLab CI CD component and just use this in all your project pipelines without having to rewrite the same code all the time. And this is really great to reduce redundancies, and it simplifies updates to all of your pipelines, because if you want to change something in your GitLab CI CD jobs, you just have to update this one component and it automatically becomes live for all the projects where this is used in. I just recently found out this super cool trick and I thought I just gonna show it to you because it will make your CI CD live in GitLab much more enjoyable. I mean, if you're enjoying weird things like this at all. But either way, I think it is a super interesting project where you can learn a lot of cool stuff and valuable skills about IT automation in GitLab. So let's check out CI CD components. Before we do that though, I quickly want to show you another interesting component that I'm using for IT automation in my home lab called Kestra. Kestra is a powerful and simplified workflow orchestrator that helps you to run automations for all of your favorite tools and APIs in one centralized platform. For example, you can use it to run scripting languages like Python, Node.js, or PowerShell. It supports cloud providers and automation tools like Ansible or Terraform, even AI technologies and many more. It has a declarative language where you can build more powerful workflows by using triggers, loops, and logical operations. It is super cool. Kestra supports over 600 different plugins, allowing you to build automated workflows with unlimited possibilities, and visualizes this all in a real-time monitoring dashboard where you can drill into execution metrics, debug logs, time-based diagrams, and so many more things. And the best is, Kestra has an open source version that you can just deploy using Docker, Kubernetes, or any other tool in your home lab completely for free. I've already made a few video tutorials about Kestra, so definitely check them out for a full deep dive. And if you're ready to use it in your company environment, then check out the Kestra's Enterprise Edition that has many more practical features for professional environments. So just talk to them. They really have a good support. And of course, I'll link you the website and my video tutorials about Kestra in the description box down below, so check it out. Okay guys, so let's get started with GitLab CI CD components. I hope you've all watched the first video tutorial about GitLab CI CD, where I've covered all of the basics, such as creating the GitLab CI.jml file, stages, and jobs. So if you're unfamiliar with how GitLab CI CD works in general, it might be challenging to follow this one, so definitely check out the first video tutorial if you haven't it already. Of course, the link is also in the description. But now let's get started. And if we take a look at the official documentation about GitLab CI CD components, so you can see that, as I've told you, this is a relatively new feature that was introduced to create a reusable single pipeline configuration unit, which can be used as a smaller part of a larger pipeline, and it can be configured with input parameters for a more dynamic behavior. So it's something like variables that you can define separately for each project with a different value where you're using the component. These components are used in other GitLab CI pipelines by just using the include keyword. So this is similar to how you do it with GitLab CI templates, if you know this. But compared to templates, components have several advantages. So first of all, a component can be listed in the GitLab CI CD catalog. So for example, if you check out the catalog of the public GitLab.com platform, for example, you can see all the components that other people have created and published to the catalog. And in case of a self-managed GitLab CI CD platform, so for your home lab, you can also use this, but it is then of course just existing across your local GitLab environment. Now, the second advantage components have over templates is that you can release components with a specific version. So whenever you're including CI CD components in other pipeline jobs, you can always refer to a specific version tag, and that gives you much better control over update management of the components. So suppose you want to update your CI CD component that does something in your pipeline. In that case, the project pipeline will still run with the version that was configured, which is excellent if you want to ensure that components update aren't breaking anything inside your critical project pipelines. But you can also use it to simplify your update procedure, because you can also use the latest version tag in your include instructions, which means whenever you release a new version of the CI CD component, it automatically updates to the latest version in all of the job project pipelines. And this is what I personally do in almost all of my projects, because then I only need to make this one update to my CI CD components to change something, and I don't have to touch all the other 30 or 40 projects where I'm using this. And that really saves a lot of time, especially in a self-managed GitLab platform where you're working on multiple different projects. Okay, so this is how components work in general. And if you remember the GitLab CI CD catalog that I just showed you, there I had one question regarding the self-managed GitLab platform. So do I really have to write all of these components myself? Or could I also just import existing CI CD components from the public catalog on GitLab.com to my self-managed platform? And unfortunately, this does not work, at least yet at the time of recording this video. It might come as a new feature in the future, but for now, this does not work. What I've done is I've written all of my CI CD components myself. Actually, there are just 3 of them, but it was really a great learning experience, and also the reason why I'm making this video, to show you how the process works. Okay, so here you see my self-managed GitLab platform. As you can see, some of these projects here have a tag called CI CD catalog project. And let me walk you through the process how to create these components. First of all, you have to create a group in your self-managed GitLab platform that is called components. So just create a new group. It doesn't matter if this is a private or public or internal repository, just make sure that you name it components. And then if you have that group, you can jump in there and create new projects for all of your components. By the way, I will show you all of these 3 components and how they work in a lot more detail. But first of all, let's go through some of the basics, how to create such a component. And let's just create a new project in this group that I'm just going to call tests. Yeah, I'm not very creative, but anyways. So when you create a project, there's just one thing you need to do to enable it in the CI CD catalog. You just go to settings, go to general, and then you scroll down to visibility, project features, and permissions. Scroll all the way down to the bottom where you find a checkbox for CI CD catalog project. Enabling this will make the project findable in the CI CD catalog. Actually, for a self-managed platform, it might not be so important, but I think it's great because if we go back to my GitLab platform, here you will find on the left side the CI CD catalog, where you can see all of your components with a version tag. So that is the latest version that you have released, and you can easily open the documentation README file of these projects as well. All right, so let's return to our components group. There we have created our new project. Also, make sure to give this a description. This is a requirement to release new versions of CI CD components. If your project doesn't have a correct description, it will not work and you will run into some errors. Let's give it a description: testing component, whatever. It's not really that important. It just needs to be something in there. And then let's go back and clone this to my local device. And let's clone it here, cd into this, and also open it in VS Code. All right, so here we have our README file. If we go back to the documentation, you also have some examples how to create a component with some instructions and requirements. So we can basically grab this template from the documentation. So this will go into a new directory that we're gonna call templates. So all of the actions or the functions of your components have to go into this templates and then create a new template file for a specific function or action. For example, let's just add a test.jml file and start with this basic template from the documentation. The first section is where you specify your input parameters. So these are the variables. When you later use these components in your individual projects, you can define these variables and then refer to this in the actual job. So it's really simple to define these input parameters. Just put them under inputs with a specific name. For example, this is a variable that contains the stage of the job, and it also has a default value that is set to test. But we can also create other input parameters. For example, a parameter that is called message, and you can also set a default value here, so then you don't need to change this input setting when you're using the pipeline. Otherwise, if you don't have a default value, you definitely need to specify this variable later in the project pipeline. So here, for example, we just say hello world. Let's do a very basic test, and you can, by the way, also give it a description, so that goes into the documentation in the CI CD catalog later, so then you can better describe what this input parameter is about. And then, after these 3 dashes here, we have the second section where you define the actual job. So here you can give this job a name, component job, and this really just works like any CI CD job in GitLab. And you can use the $sign with 2 brackets here to use the values from your input parameters later. So for example, here we have as the stage. I, by the way, like to put the scripts below the stage, and yeah, I like this to be the first thing. Here you can see this will have the stage, whatever someone has put into the input parameter stage. By default it is test, so I think that's fine. But let's also do something with the message parameter. For example, if we want to execute just a basic echo command and then just refer to our input message parameter, let's just start simple, and then I will later show you some much more useful examples. But yeah, okay, I think this is everything that we need right now. Let's push this to GitLab. All right, so what we now need to do is to make this a CI CD component usable by other jobs. We need to publish a release for this. If you go back to the documentation, you can also find a great description of a GitLab CI.yaml file. So this is a CI CD job that will automatically create a new release of the component from a tag that you create. So if you haven't used GitLab tags before, these are basically copies of your repository where you can save a specific point in time. For example, if you release a new version, you want to also have this as a separate tag, so you can refer back to this version later and just maintain a history of everything that you're doing. And then from that tag, automatically create a release. This is what this automation job is doing. So what we just need to do is we just need to go back to our repository, add a .gitlab ci.jml file, and just paste this from the documentation in there. So there's nothing else we need to adjust. This just works totally fine. Oh, wait, there's one thing I actually need to do. Of course, we also need to define the stage release. So okay, so once we have created our release automation pipeline and we have created the basic logic of our component, we can create the first release. And the way how you do this, again, we just need to create a tag, and the automation pipeline is doing everything else that we need. So if you are happy with everything that you're created here and you just want to test it, you can create a new tag here in the UI, or of course you can do it in CLI or automate it. It doesn't really matter. It's up to you. So let's create a new tag. And what I also like to do all the time is I like to create a version number for every tag. So for example, let's just name it version 1.00. It's the first release version that we are creating, and create the tag. So now that we've done that, if our automation pipeline has been created successfully, we should see a new job that is currently running, creating a release from the tag with the name 1.00, because we have used that in the tag name. So everything is fine. And if we go to deploy releases, here's our release 1.00. And it has the tag CI CD catalog. So this makes sure that we've done everything correctly. And if we go to this CI CD catalog, and here you can also see the summary of all of the input parameters. This is what I've explained earlier, that if you give it a description, it will show up here, and it makes it much easier for someone to use your component because it has the default value, it has a description, it has the input parameters all defined, so everybody knows how to use this component. And here you can also find the include statement. So this is a a simple instruction that you just have to put in your actual project pipelines. So yeah, now that we have our test CI CD component, actually it's not doing anything useful, but hey, it just works as a hello world example. So let's create a new project where we use this component. So we just grab this here, our include instruction. We're going to need that later. And let's go into project. I'm just going to create a new project here for my personal GitLab account. I'm just going to call this CI CD tests. I don't know. Let's call it free. I'm pretty sure I've created a bunch of others before. So let's create this. Nothing really special to explain. Of course, I'm also going to clone this to my local device. This is where we define our pipelines. And usually you would start by creating the stages. That's fine. Let's create the stage test. And now we would have to create our automation logic. So start with a job one, stage, script, blah, blah, blah. But wait, we don't need to do this anymore because we can just use the include statement and just use the logic that we've already defined in the component. So just put it here, include component, that's fine. And now we might want to adjust the message and change this from hello world to something else, right? So let's go back to our include statements and define the message parameter and set this to hello from CI CD test free. And this is how you modify things like this message in your component for all of the other jobs. So in any other jobs, you can change the input parameter and use the different value. Okay, so let's test if this works. I'm really excited if it's going to be successful at the first try. So that would be a surprise. And let's go back to our actual project pipeline, because there we should see a new job. The name component job still comes from this here, from the component template. By the way, you can also modify this, define an input parameter for the name of the component job. So then you can give each job individual names in your project pipelines by still using the same logic from the component. That's also pretty cool. But here I'm fine with this here. So let's go into the log. So here we should see the message, and there it is. Hello from CI CD test free, and there you can see the message. Okay, so this is a very simple example. Well, I will show you one more thing that might be pretty important. So first of all, one thing that I'm going to change in the project CI CD test free is, here you can see the pinned version tag 1.00. If I would update the component and make any changes, this would not be applied in the pipeline right now because it's still using the older version. But you can use the word latest here and then see how this is updated. So let's, for example, go back to our component and release a new version 1.01, for example, with a simple change. Of course, you can change the entire logic of everything if you need, but again, very basic test. So change message. This is always the process how we release a new version. You push the changes into the main branch. Then we go back to our CI CD components here, and then we create a new tag from the latest changes that we've pushed, with the name 1.01, for example. Updated message. Of course, we should give a description here. You should see the build job will automatically run a new release version for this component. So once this is finished, and I just give it a few seconds, if we return back to our CI CD catalog, you should see the version number has been updated to 1.01. But of course, you can also refer to all of the other versions and tags in the history if you like. Okay, so let's go back to our CI test free. If we want to now run the job with the updated version, because we've changed it to the latest tag, so we can just invoke a new run by changing one of the files and make a push to this, for example. Make a simple change in the README file. I think that's fine. And let's push this change to GitLab. So now, in the project pipelines, if we go back to the jobs, you should see that this is running a new job of the component. And if we go into the log, we should see the updated message without us having to make any change on the project repository by just updating the component. And here you can see this is the change that we've just done. And this is pretty cool. This is how you can really update the logic of just one component and have this updated across all of your pipelines where this is used if you're using the latest version of your component in your other project pipelines. So this is how it basically works, and you can extend this practice to do anything you want, depending on what technologies you're using in your specific environment. And how you want to create these scripts and components and what you do with them is basically up to you. But I still would like to show you some examples that I've created for my home lab and how I'm using this in my environment, maybe as an inspiration how you could do this for yourself. And of course, you will also find all of these templates of the components that I've created for my home lab on my public GitHub repository boilerplates. So just go to my GitHub profile. You will find it in the description of this video down below under my docs. And this will take you to this repo where you will find all of the Docker Compose projects. And I will also add another folder later called Actions GitLab, where I update some of the templates for the components. And there you will find it later. And then you can basically just copy paste it to your self-managed GitLab instance or whatever you want to do with it, adjust it, customize it. So feel free to do anything with this that might be useful. So let's go to my CI CD catalog here. And first of all, I want to show you my Terraform component that I've written. Again, I'm not a professional software developer. I might have done something wrong and might not have used the best practices to do it, but it actually works fine for my environment. So hey, here's how I've done it. I've basically created two templates here, so two functions. The validate function that will just run on every push to the main branch or on every pull request. So whenever I want to implement a new change in my infrastructure, I first of all want to just test if the file is correct before actually applying it. So therefore, I just, when I create a merge request or pull request, it will run this validate pipeline. And whenever this is pushed into the main branch, it will run the apply pipeline, the validate pipeline as well, but this is not necessary. This is the actual pipeline that does apply all the changes on my infrastructure. I've used a few input parameters here, such as the name for the job, the stage, just we've done in our example, and then the root directory. So this is a directory where the Terraform, or in my case, the OpenTofu project, is located in the project repository under /Terraform. So all of my Terraform files in each of my projects usually are located in this directory. But whenever I'm writing a new project where this is located in a different directory, I could update or change this by using the roots directory input parameter. And the same is also true for the state name. Here, for example, you can see how I'm using these components. Here is the directory Terraform. And there's currently a provider configuration that I've set for DNS name. So maybe let's just test this component by adding a new DNS record to this. I will just grab one template from my actual production project here and modify it a little. So maybe test DNS 1. Yeah, I think that's fine. Test DNS 1 and just set this to the IP address of the Google's DNS server. So if I make this change to my project, because I've defined or included the Terraform component, and we're making this push to main, it should automatically run the apply job and make this change active on my DNS server. And then we need to go back to my CI CD test project here. Let's go into pipelines. It first validates the Terraform file. This is the first function of my component. And the second component, apply Terraform file, that's currently pending. Let's refresh it. Oh, there it is running. And let's go into the logs and see if everything works, hopefully. And so here we are. The apply job was complete. You can see here, this basically just applied the changes that we've made to the Terraform files here to the project. And let me actually also go into the component and show you the code of the component. This is again what you will find on my GitHub templates here. These are the input parameters that you've also seen in the documentation and how I've created them. I've also defined some variables. This is necessary for my Terraform backend file. I'm managing this in GitLab, by the way. I've also done a separate video about this, so check it out if you like. And here is the actual job logic. You can see this uses a container image from the OpenTofu project. This is the OpenTofu container that already includes all of the necessary tools for OpenTofu. And then it first goes into the Terraform root directory here. So that, by the way, comes from if we go up here, from the variables that is an environment variable that is automatically set by the input parameters here. Then if we go into this script, you can see I'm echoing some log lines on the Terraform CI CD pipeline log. I don't know if that's necessary, but sometimes it is useful to see what is happening here and at which point it might fail and so on. So this runs the tofu init command, initializes a project with a backend configuration on my self-hosted GitLab instance, first validates the project. Actually, this is not really necessary because I've validated it before in the other job here. But anyways, I'm still leaving it there. I think that's fine. Then it runs the tofu plan command. So it first plans what changes have to be applied on the infrastructure, outputs this into a file, and then applies this automatically on the infrastructure with an auto approve. And the log false because I know this is actually not really that great, but I ran into some problems where this log false wasn't really set, so I needed this for whatever reason. And as you can also see here in the component logic, you can also predefine the rules. Yeah, of course, you can also put input parameters in here if you want to change it. So here you can see this automatically runs the component job if it's included in a project, but only when there is a commit to the main branch and if there is an actual change in the Terraform's root directory. So this logic I have created because when I have a large project that includes many other components, I only want to run this pipeline when there is an actual change to the files in the Terraform directory. So therefore I've added this if-else statement here. And yeah, the same logic I'm also following for my other components. Let me show you another example. I hope you're up for some others. If I already lost you, I'm sorry, but it might be interesting for some of you guys. So let's go into my Docker components. So here I've created 3 separate functions. The first function is the test. So this basically runs a linting command. So here you can see it uses the Docker image, which already comes with Docker CLI commands and everything, and it then runs a Docker compose config quiet, so which is basically just testing the compose configuration is everything is all right. And if it runs into an error, I would see this in the pipeline. The next function deploy is also pretty useful. So this will deploy a Docker compose file from my GitLab repository to one of my remote servers, which is really great for automating my entire update procedure. So here you can see I've created a bunch of different input parameters that I just needed for the root directory, the project file in the repository, the remote host, the user, the SSH key. So for the remote server where I want to copy this file to, in which directory I want to copy it, and also for the Docker hub, because again, Docker changed its pulling limitations and stuff, so that's why I'm also using this here. First of all, log into Docker and then pulling down the latest version of the image. So what this is basically doing is, and I want to just simply summarize it, you can drill into all of the details if you want. The way how I'm using this component is pretty cool. If we go back to the CI CD test project, for example, here in this project, I have a Docker compose file for a simple Nginx server. And in the CI CD pipeline, if we go here, I have created or included 2 functions of this. And here in the input parameters, you can see I want to deploy this to my production server with my user, my SSH keys, and the compose file that you find in the root directory deployments test1. And this, by the way, only runs when I make changes to this file, because in the components, I also added the rules. Here you can see only if this is a push to the main branch and it changes in the root directory, only the Docker compose project file, then it will publish the update and restart the container on my remote server. So I will just demonstrate how this works, and I hope it works the first try. It should work because for all my other projects it's working this way. So here you can see these are all of my production projects, and I want to deploy this project here. Deploy test1 to this server. It is not existing here. So usually I would have to copy this file, start up the container, and whenever I make an update, do the same thing. When I want to push this, and this of course only runs if I make a change here. For example, let's just hit an enter. That's a simple change in the file. That's enough. Deploy to production. Let's commit this. And then it should run the component because I've included it here as a deploy function. And let's go to my GitLab CI CD pipelines job, you should see, there it is. So there's the deploy job running. First of all, it tests the file. So it does a config quiet if there is an error in the file. If I would have done something wrong, it will stop at this point and not deploy it to the server. Then we go back to the deploy to production job. So let's go in here. And yep, this was also successful. Here you can see the log. Let's go to my production server. There I can show you test 1. This is the project that is existing. And the Nginx server is currently running on my server. And this is how I deploy all of my other projects automatically using GitLab CI CD pipelines, but now by using these new components. And I don't have to define all of this job logic in the project pipelines. I can just copy these component includes, copy it to the projects, put it in the right directories, put in the input parameters, and then I'm fine. So this is really simplifying a lot for me. And I'm also working on another component that will automatically run an Ansible playbook whenever there's a change in this. For example, here, this is currently just gathering some facts from my servers. But when I make a change in here, this also should run the Ansible component job. I'm not going to go through this in detail. Don't worry, we're almost done. So here, let's go back to pipelines. Hopefully this is correct. I'm still working on this, but the last test was successful at least. So let's go into this log here. This is using a different logic here. You can see I haven't really found a great Ansible container image where the Ansible CLI tools are installed. So I just thought I'm going to use in the component. Let's go into the Ansible component. So here in the components, what I've done is I've just used an Alpine Docker image. It's really a small, efficient image. Here you can see I'm installing OpenSSH client and Ansible core into this temporary container. And then I'm just executing Ansible playbook with the inventory file, with a project file. That's the entire component logic, so not really complicated. But this is also how I can automate Ansible playbooks that should automatically run whenever they are changing in a Git repository. And yeah, that's how I implemented it. Alright, so I think that's enough for today. That's basically how I'm using GitLab CI CD components and everything you probably have to know about it. Please let me know, what do you think about the templates that I've created? Of course, maybe I've done the one or another thing wrong. You can probably tell me. Yes, Christoph, I'm looking at you, yeah? So you probably will tell me when I've done something wrong. But hey, I appreciate it. I'm open for all constructive feedback. And if you have other use cases or other ideas how we could use components, we might also create others and share it in our community. I think that would be really great. So let me know in the comments your thoughts. If you found this helpful, please consider supporting me on YouTube or on Patreon if you like. Thanks to all the people already doing this. You guys are really amazing. It's a huge help for creating these videos. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I'm gonna catch you in the next video. Take care. Bye bye.